Hello, my name is Isabella Martinez, and I need to tell you about the Christmas dinner that changed everything. Picture this: your stepmother selling your deceased mother's wedding ring behind your back, then watching her face crumble as her dirty secrets spill out in front of the entire family. That's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago, and honestly, I'm still processing it all. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel. Give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. I'm 26, living in Portland, Oregon, working as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm. My mom, Elena, passed away from cancer when I was 16. Dad remarried Victoria 2 years later, a woman 15 years younger than him who swept into our lives with her perfectly manicured nails and fake sympathy. For 8 years, I've watched Victoria systematically erase my mother's presence from our family home. First, it was the family photos. Then Mom's books disappeared from the shelves. Her favorite coffee mug vanished from the kitchen cabinet. Each disappearance felt like another piece of my mother being stolen, but Dad seemed oblivious, lost in his grief and Victoria's manipulations. The only thing I managed to save was Mom's wedding ring, a vintage 1940s white gold band with tiny diamonds that had belonged to my grandmother. Dad gave it to me right after the funeral, saying Mom always wanted me to have it someday. I kept it in a jewelry box in my childhood bedroom, visiting it whenever I stayed over for holidays. But last October, during my usual visit home to Lake Oswego, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The jewelry box was empty. The ring, the last tangible connection to my mother, was gone. When I confronted Victoria, she looked me straight in the eye and claimed she had no idea what happened to it. "Maybe your father moved it somewhere safe," she suggested with that sickeningly sweet voice. But I knew better. The way her eyes shifted, how she quickly changed the subject, every instinct told me she was lying. That's when I decided to dig deeper. What I discovered about my stepmother's secret life would not only get me my mother's ring back, but expose her for the fraud she truly was. The first clue came from an unlikely source. Mrs. Henderson, our 70-year-old neighbor who's lived next to my childhood home for 30 years. She's the type of woman who notices everything: which lights are on at unusual hours, who's coming and going, what packages get delivered. Some might call her nosy, but I've always appreciated her attention to detail. I was raking leaves in Dad's front yard the weekend after discovering the missing ring when Mrs. Henderson approached me with her usual cup of tea in hand. "Isabella, dear," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right with your stepmother?" My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" She glanced toward our house, then leaned closer. "Well, it's probably nothing, but I've noticed some unusual activity. Last month, I saw Victoria loading several boxes into her car. Fancy boxes, like the kind from jewelry stores. And there was a man with her I'd never seen before. Not your father." The pieces started clicking together. What did this man look like? Tall, well-dressed, drove a silver BMW. They seemed quite friendly. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows raised meaningfully. "He's been by several times when your father's at work. Always parks around the corner, but I see him walking up." I felt my stomach drop. Victoria was having an affair, but more importantly for me, she was selling things. Expensive things that came in jewelry store boxes. That evening, I decided to do some investigating. I knew Victoria's routine perfectly. She went to her book club every Tuesday night, supposedly. Dad worked late most weekdays at his accounting firm. This gave me a window of opportunity. Using the spare key Dad had given me years ago, I slipped into the house the following Tuesday, around 8 p.m. Victoria's car was gone. Dad wouldn't be home until 10, and I had roughly an hour to search. I started with Victoria's bedroom, the master bedroom that used to belong to my parents. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was searching for traces of my mother's ring in the room where Victoria now slept in Mom's bed. In Victoria's walk-in closet, behind designer handbags I knew Dad couldn't afford on his salary, I found a small lockbox I'd never seen before. It was tucked away on the highest shelf, hidden behind winter coats. My heart pounded as I carefully brought it down. The box was locked, but I remembered Victoria's tendency to use the same password for everything, her maiden name followed by her birth year. After finding a hairpin, I managed to pick the simple lock, a skill I'd learned from YouTube videos during a particularly boring summer in college. Inside, I found documents that made my hands shake. Bank statements showing deposits of thousands of dollars over the past 6 months, receipts from Hillsdale Estate Jewelry, a high-end consignment shop in downtown Portland, and most damning of all, photos on her phone of various pieces of jewelry, including one that made my heart stop cold. There, in crystal clear detail, was my mother's wedding ring, photographed against a black velvet backdrop with a price tag of $3,200. But that wasn't all. Among the papers was a business card for someone named Marcus Reed, with private investigator printed beneath his name. On the back, Victoria had written, Tuesday evenings, usual time, in her distinctive handwriting. Marcus Reed wasn't just her affair partner. He was a private investigator. But why would Victoria need a PI? What was she investigating, and what did it have to do with her selling my mother's jewelry? As I photographed everything with my phone, I heard Dad's car pulling into the driveway, 30 minutes early. Panic shot through me as I quickly replaced everything and slipped out through the back door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Walking home to my apartment that night, I realized I'd stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple theft. Victoria wasn't just stealing my mother's belongings. She was systematically planning something that required a private investigator and significant amounts of cash. The question was, what exactly was she planning? And how could I use this information to not only get my mother's ring back, but expose her true nature to my father? I had 6 weeks until Christmas dinner at our house, 6 weeks to gather evidence and plan my revenge. Little did I know, the truth I was about to uncover would be far more shocking than anything I could have imagined. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, but I needed time to process what I'd discovered and plan my next move. Armed with Marcus Reed's business card and the photos I'd taken, I decided to pay Hillsdale Estate Jewelry a visit. The shop was located in Portland's Pearl District, nestled between an art gallery and an overpriced boutique coffee shop. Through the window, I could see elegant displays of vintage jewelry, antique watches, and estate pieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A bell chimed as I entered, and a distinguished woman in her 50s approached me. Her nameplate read, Catherine Winters, owner. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm looking for information about a ring that may have been sold here recently. It's a family heirloom that was misplaced." Catherine's expression grew cautious. "I'm sorry, but we have strict confidentiality policies regarding our consigners. Perhaps if you have documentation proving ownership." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo Victoria had taken of my mother's ring. "This is it. The ring belonged to my late mother, and I believe it was sold here without my knowledge." Her face changed immediately. "Oh my, yes, I remember this piece. Beautiful 1940s vintage work. But I have to tell you, the woman who brought it in had all the proper documentation. She claimed to be the widow selling her late husband's first wife's jewelry." My stomach churned. Victoria had not only stolen my mother's ring, but had concocted an elaborate lie to sell it. "Did you happen to keep copies of that documentation?" "Of course. It's standard practice." Catherine disappeared into a back office and returned with a file. The consigner was Victoria Martinez. She provided a death certificate for one Elena Martinez and a marriage certificate showing her married to Robert Martinez. Everything Victoria had told the shop was technically true, but it painted a completely false picture. She'd made it sound like Dad had passed away and she was his widow, when in reality she was selling his deceased first wife's jewelry behind his back. "Is the ring still available?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "I'm afraid it sold within a week. The buyer was quite taken with its vintage charm." Catherine paused, studying my face. "You said this ring belonged to your mother?" "Yes. Elena Martinez was my mother. Victoria is my stepmother, and she had no right to sell this ring." I felt tears building but pushed them back. "Is there any way to contact the buyer?" Catherine looked genuinely sympathetic but shook her head. "Our buyer confidentiality is just as strict. However," she lowered her voice, "the buyer did mention they collect vintage engagement and wedding rings. They specifically sought pieces with emotional history. It's possible they might be willing to sell it back if they understood the circumstances." She handed me a piece of paper with a name and phone number. "I can't officially give you this information, but if you happen to find this paper on the ground outside my shop," Catherine winked. "The buyer's name is Dr. Margaret Chen. She's a retired professor who collects estate jewelry." I thanked Catherine profusely and left the shop with renewed hope. At least I now had a lead on getting Mom's ring back. But I still needed to understand Victoria's bigger plan. Why did she need a private investigator? What was she really up to? That afternoon, I decided to stake out Marcus Reed's office, which I'd found through a quick online search. His PI firm was located in a modest building near Pioneer Square, the kind of place that screamed discretion assured. I parked across the street with a coffee and a newspaper, feeling like a character in a detective novel. Around 3 p.m., I spotted Victoria's car pulling up. She was dressed more elegantly than usual, a black dress and heels that definitely weren't her typical mom-around-the-house attire. Through my phone's camera zoom, I watched her enter the building. 45 minutes later, she emerged with Marcus Reed, a tall, handsome man in his early 40s who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. They stood close together on the sidewalk, and their body language told me everything I needed to know about their relationship. But more importantly, I saw Marcus hand Victoria a manila envelope. This wasn't just an affair. This was business. Victoria was paying a private investigator for something, and given the cash deposits I'd seen in her lockbox, it was expensive business. As they parted ways with what was definitely not a business-appropriate kiss, I made a decision. I needed to know what was in that envelope, and I needed to understand exactly what Victoria was planning. Because something told me it was going to affect more than just my mother's stolen ring. The game was about to get much more complicated, but I was ready to play. After all, Victoria had taught me well over the years. Sometimes you have to be willing to do whatever it takes to protect what matters most. After following Victoria and Marcus, I knew I needed professional help. My college roommate, Jenny, worked as a paralegal at a downtown law firm, and I trusted her completely. More importantly, she had access to databases and resources that could help me understand what Victoria was really planning. "Izzy, this is some serious Nancy Drew stuff," Jenny said as we sat in her cramped office after hours, scrolling through public records on her computer. "You said the PI's name was Marcus Reed?" "Yes, and I have photos of them together, plus evidence that she's been paying him for months." Jenny's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Okay, Marcus Reed, private investigator, licensed in Oregon since 2018. Before that, he worked for..." Her eyes widened. "Oh, this is interesting. He used to work for an insurance company, specializing in fraud investigation." A chill ran down my spine. Insurance fraud? It gets better. Look at this. Jenny turned her monitor toward me. "Your dad's life insurance policy is part of public record because of some legal filing from when your parents' estate was settled. Robert Martinez has a $500,000 life insurance policy through his accounting firm, with Victoria as the primary beneficiary as of 3 years ago." The pieces were starting to form a terrifying picture. You don't think she's planning to, I don't know what she's planning, but hiring a former insurance fraud investigator when you're the beneficiary of a large life insurance policy, that's not a coincidence. Jenny leaned back in her chair. We need to find out what's in those reports Marcus has been giving her. The next few days, I became obsessed with understanding Victoria's plan. I started paying closer attention to Dad during our weekly phone calls, listening for any signs that something was wrong. But he sounded normal. Tired from work, excited about a new client, complaining about his back pain from sitting at a desk all day. Wait, back pain. Dad had never mentioned back pain before. In fact, he'd always prided himself on being in good health for a 58-year-old man. He played tennis twice a week, walked regularly, and had annual physicals that always came back clean. "Dad," I said during our Thursday evening call, "how long have you been having back problems?" "Oh, it started about 6 months ago. Victoria's been wonderful about it. She found this new doctor who's been helping me manage the pain. Dr. Patterson, I think? He's got me on some new medication that really helps." My blood went cold. 6 months ago was exactly when Victoria's deposits had started showing up in her secret bank account. 6 months ago was when she'd begun her relationship with Marcus Reed. What kind of medication? I tried to keep my voice casual. Some kind of muscle relaxer, I think. Victoria handles all that, picks up my prescriptions, makes sure I take them on time. She's been such a blessing, Izzy. I don't know what I'd do without her. That weekend, I drove to Lake Oswego with a plan. I told Dad I wanted to cook dinner for him and Victoria, a way to spend family time together. What I really wanted was access to Dad's medication. During dinner preparation, while Victoria was in the living room watching TV and Dad was outside grilling, I slipped into their bathroom. The medicine cabinet revealed several prescription bottles, all filled by a pharmacy I'd never heard of, all prescribed by Dr. Patterson. I quickly photographed the labels with my phone. The medications had names I didn't recognize, but the dosage instructions were concerning. Take as needed for pain, may cause drowsiness and confusion. When I got home that night, I researched every medication. What I found made my hands shake. These weren't standard muscle relaxers. They were powerful drugs that, when combined, could cause memory loss, confusion, and in large doses, could be fatal. But the most chilling discovery came when I looked up Dr. Patterson. According to the Oregon Medical Board's website, Dr. Patterson's license had been suspended 6 months ago for inappropriate prescribing practices and failure to maintain proper patient records. Victoria wasn't just having an affair and stealing my mother's jewelry. She was slowly poisoning my father with the help of a disgraced doctor, while using a private investigator to plan what I could only assume was the perfect crime. The woman who had smiled at me across the dinner table just hours earlier, who'd pretended to care about my career and dating life, was systematically planning to murder my father for his life insurance money. And I was the only one who knew. I had exactly 6 weeks until Christmas dinner to figure out how to save my father's life and expose Victoria for the monster she truly was. The stakes had just gotten infinitely higher than recovering my mother's wedding ring. But first, I needed proof that would hold up in court. Because if I was going to accuse my stepmother of attempted murder, I better be absolutely certain I could prove it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's trusting face as he talked about how wonderful Victoria had been, taking care of his medication, managing his health. The irony was sickening. The woman he thought was helping him was actually slowly killing him. By 6 a.m., I was on my laptop, researching everything I could about the medications Victoria was giving Dad. The combination was particularly insidious. Individually, each drug appeared to treat legitimate conditions, but together they created a cocktail that would gradually weaken someone's heart and cognitive function. I needed help from someone who understood medicine, so I called my friend Rachel, who worked as a nurse at Oatsu Hospital. We'd maintained our friendship since college, and I trusted her discretion. "Rachel, I need your opinion on something medical, and I need you to keep this completely confidential." "Of course, what's going on?" I read her the list of medications and their dosages. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Izzy, these medications together, this isn't a normal treatment protocol for back pain. The dosages are all at the high end of safe ranges, and combining them like this would cause significant cognitive impairment and cardiac stress. Who is taking these?" "My dad. My stepmother says his doctor prescribed them." "You need to get him to a real doctor immediately. Long-term use of this combination could cause permanent damage or worse. And Izzy, no legitimate doctor would prescribe this combination for simple back pain. Armed with Rachel's medical opinion, I knew I had enough to convince Dad he was in danger. But I also knew Victoria would never let me get him alone long enough to explain everything. She'd been carefully controlling his environment for months. I decided to enlist Mrs. Henderson's help. That Tuesday evening, I parked around the corner from Dad's house and waited for Victoria to leave for her supposed book club meeting. Right on schedule, she drove away at 7:30 p.m. Mrs. Henderson was waiting by her fence as planned. "She just left, dear. Your father's in the backyard." I found Dad sitting on the patio, looking more frail than I'd seen him in years. The medication was clearly taking its toll. His skin had a grayish pallor, and his hands shook slightly as he held his coffee cup. "Dad, we need to talk. It's important." "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything okay?" I sat down beside him and pulled out my phone. "Dad, I need you to listen to me carefully. Victoria has been lying to you about your medication. Look at these photos." I showed him the pictures I'd taken of his prescription bottles. "Dr. Patterson lost his medical license 6 months ago. These medications aren't for back pain. They're slowly poisoning you." Dad's face went pale. "That's impossible. Victoria wouldn't. She loves me." "Dad, Victoria has been having an affair with a private investigator. She's been selling Mom's belongings, including her wedding ring, and she's been systematically drugging you while planning to collect on your life insurance policy." I showed him the photos I'd taken at Marcus Reed's office, the bank statements I'd photographed, and the research I'd done on his medications. With each piece of evidence, I watched Dad's world crumble. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Why would she do this? I gave her everything she wanted." "Because $500,000 is more than everything you could give her while you're alive." Dad was quiet for a long time, processing the betrayal. Finally, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "What do we do?" "First, you stop taking those pills immediately. Rachel says you need to see a real doctor right away to assess any damage. Second, we need to document everything before Victoria realizes we know." "But if I suddenly stop taking the medication, won't she notice?" I'd already thought of that. "We're going to replace the pills with harmless vitamins that look similar. Mrs. Henderson has agreed to help us. She'll pick up the vitamins while you're at work tomorrow." Dad nodded slowly. "And then we gather enough evidence to turn her into the police. But Dad, we have to be careful. If Victoria realizes we know, she might try to accelerate her timeline." That night, I helped Dad secretly dispose of his current medications and replace them with look-alike vitamins. We also installed a small security camera in his bedroom disguised as a phone charger to record any suspicious behavior. As I drove home, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. I'd potentially saved my father's life, but I'd also declared war on a woman who had already proven she was capable of murder. Victoria wouldn't go down without a fight, and I needed to be ready for whatever she threw at me next. Dad called me at work the next afternoon, his voice shaky. "Isabella, Victoria knows something's wrong. She kept asking me how I was feeling, if the medication was working, why I seemed more alert today." My heart sank. We'd only had one day of Dad not taking the real pills, and Victoria had already noticed the difference. She was more observant than I'd given her credit for. "Did you say anything?" I told her I was feeling better because I'd slept well, but she seemed suspicious. She kept staring at me during dinner, like she was trying to figure something out. That evening, I decided to review the footage from the hidden camera we'd installed. What I saw made my blood boil. At 11 p.m., after Dad had gone to sleep, Victoria had entered their bedroom with a small syringe. The video clearly showed her injecting something into Dad's water glass on his nightstand. She wasn't just relying on the pills. She was also drugging his water to ensure he stayed sedated and confused. The woman was more calculating and dangerous than I'd imagined. I immediately called Dad. "Don't drink anything Victoria gives you. Don't drink from any glass that's been sitting out. Only drink from bottles you open yourself." My God, Isabella, what have I gotten myself into? The next morning, I met with Jenny at her law office to review all the evidence we'd gathered. She'd been researching Victoria's background and had uncovered some disturbing information. "Your stepmother isn't who she claims to be," Jenny said, spreading documents across her desk. "Victoria Martinez was married before, to a man named David Chen, who died in a suspicious accident 3 years ago in Sacramento." My hands went cold. David Chen, as in related to Dr. Margaret Chen, the woman who bought my mother's ring. "I don't know, but it's worth investigating. Here's what's really interesting. David Chen had a large life insurance policy, and Victoria was the beneficiary. The insurance company investigated but couldn't prove anything suspicious. We were dealing with a serial killer. Victoria had done this before, successfully, and now she was using the same playbook on my father. There's more," Jenny continued. "I found the real reason Victoria hired Marcus Reed. She's been having him investigate you." "Me? Why?" Jenny handed me a file folder. "Because you're Dad's primary beneficiary if something happens to Victoria. She needed to know if you'd be a problem, if you'd investigate his death too closely. Marcus has been compiling a psychological profile on you, your routines, your relationships, your financial situation." The folder contained photos of me leaving my apartment, reports on my work schedule, even details about my dating life. Victoria had been studying me like a predator studies prey, trying to determine if I'd be a threat to her plans. "But this is actually good news," Jenny said. "It proves premeditation. Combined with the medical evidence and the camera footage, we have enough to take to the police." That afternoon, I met with Detective Sarah Williams at the Portland Police Bureau. She was a veteran investigator in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes and fraud. I'd chosen her specifically because of her experience with insurance fraud cases. Detective Williams listened to my story with growing concern, reviewing each piece of evidence carefully. The hidden camera footage of Victoria injecting something into Dad's water glass particularly caught her attention. "This is serious, Isabella. We need to test that water and those fake medications immediately. But I have to warn you, if we move too quickly, Victoria might destroy evidence or flee. We need to be strategic." "What do you suggest?" "We need to catch her in the act with undeniable proof. The syringe footage is good, but a defense attorney could argue she was giving him legitimate medication. We need to catch her doing something that can't be explained away." Detective Williams proposed a plan. We would continue monitoring Victoria while building our case, but we'd also set a trap. During Christmas dinner, which was still 3 weeks away, we would confront her publicly with all the evidence, forcing her to either confess or make a mistake that would seal her fate. The key is to make her feel cornered, but not so cornered that she becomes violent, Detective Williams explained. "We'll have officers positioned nearby, and your father will be wearing a wire to record everything she says." It was risky, but it was also our best chance to get a full confession and ensure Victoria couldn't hurt anyone else. Dad would have to continue pretending to take his medication while we gathered the final pieces of evidence. As I left the police station, I felt a mixture of hope and terror. In 3 weeks, either Victoria would be in custody and Dad would be safe, or our plan would backfire spectacularly. Either way, this Christmas dinner would be one nobody would ever forget. The 3 weeks leading up to Christmas were the longest of my life. Dad and I maintained an elaborate charade. He pretended to still be taking Victoria's poisonous medication while secretly replacing them with harmless vitamins, and I pretended everything was normal during my regular visits home. But Victoria was getting suspicious. She'd started checking Dad's pill bottles more frequently, counting the remaining pills to ensure he was taking them on schedule. She'd also begun asking pointed questions about my visits home. "Isabella's been coming around a lot lately," I overheard her telling someone on the phone during one of my covert surveillance sessions. "It's unusual for her to be so attentive to family time." Detective Williams had assigned an undercover officer to monitor Victoria's movements, and what they discovered was chilling. Victoria had been meeting with Marcus Reed almost daily, and they'd been photographing the inside of Dad's house, documenting valuable items and important papers. "They're preparing for the aftermath," Detective Williams explained during one of our secret meetings. "They want to know exactly what assets your father has and where everything is located. This supports our theory that they're planning his death soon." The most disturbing discovery came when we intercepted a conversation between Victoria and Marcus. Using a long-range microphone, police had recorded them discussing the timeline. "Robert's tolerance to the medication is building faster than expected," Victoria had said. "We need to move to the final phase before Christmas. The holiday timing will make everything seem more natural, a heart attack during the stress of the season." They were planning to kill Dad before Christmas dinner. Our trap would be too late. Detective Williams immediately implemented an emergency protection plan. Starting December 20th, undercover officers would be stationed around Dad's house, 24/7. Dad would also carry a panic button disguised as a car key fob. "We can't wait for Christmas dinner," Detective Williams decided. "We're going to arrest Victoria on December 23rd when she makes her next move." But Victoria was smarter than we anticipated. On December 22nd, she suddenly announced a change of plans to Dad. "Honey, I've been thinking," she said over breakfast, according to the wire Dad was wearing. "Let's skip Christmas dinner at home this year. I've made reservations at that lovely resort in Bend. We could have a romantic getaway, just the two of us." My heart stopped when Dad relayed this information. A remote resort would be the perfect place for Victoria to finish her plan without witnesses or interference. But if we arrested her before they left, we might not have enough evidence for a conviction. Detective Williams made a difficult decision. "We let them go to Bend, but we'll have a full surveillance team following them. Officers will be posted at the resort, and your father will have multiple panic buttons and a GPS tracker." "What if something goes wrong?" I asked. "We'll be watching every moment. The second Victoria makes a move, we'll intervene." Dad was terrified but determined to see this through. "If we don't stop her now, she'll just try again later, maybe with her next victim," he said. "I can't live with myself knowing I could have prevented that." On December 23rd, I watched from a distance as Dad and Victoria loaded their car for Bend. Dad looked pale but resolute. Victoria seemed unusually animated, almost excited, which sent chills down my spine. As their car pulled out of the driveway, followed discreetly by unmarked police vehicles, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong. Victoria had been one step ahead of us this entire time. What if she'd figured out our plan? I spent that afternoon gathering the evidence I'd need for Plan B. If something happened to Dad at the resort, I wanted to be absolutely certain Victoria would never hurt anyone again. I organized all the photos, documents, and recordings we'd collected over the past month. That evening, Detective Williams called with an update. They've checked into the resort. Victoria insisted on a room on the 4th floor with a balcony overlooking the gorge. She's also been asking the staff detailed questions about the building's security cameras and emergency procedures. The balcony detail made my stomach turn. Victoria wasn't planning a heart attack. She was planning to make Dad's death look like a suicide or accident, pushing him from the balcony. "We're moving our team closer," Detective Williams assured me. "Officers are stationed in adjacent rooms and in the lobby. We won't let anything happen to your father." But as I lay awake that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria had one more surprise in store for all of us. She'd been planning this for months, and she was far too smart to be caught off guard by our surveillance. Whatever was going to happen at that resort, I had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to go according to our plan. I was right to be worried. At 3:47 a.m. on December 24th, my phone rang. Detective Williams' voice was tense. "Isabella, there's been a development. Victoria slipped our surveillance team. She and your father left the resort through a service exit around 2 a.m. We're tracking his GPS, but they're heading toward the mountains, away from civilization." My worst fears were coming true. Victoria had figured out we were watching and had moved to Plan C, whatever that was. Where are they going? It looks like they're heading toward Crater Lake. There's a cabin up there that Marcus Reed rented under a false name 2 weeks ago. We found the rental agreement in his office when we executed a search warrant an hour ago. I was already grabbing my keys. "I'm coming up there." "Absolutely not. This is a police matter now. Victoria has proven she's dangerous and unpredictable." But I was already in my car. Dad was my family, and I wasn't going to sit in Portland while Victoria tried to kill him in some remote cabin. Detective Williams could arrest me later. The drive to Crater Lake in the middle of winter was treacherous, but adrenaline kept me focused. I followed the GPS coordinates Detective Williams had reluctantly texted me, staying in constant contact with the police team that was also racing toward the mountain. I arrived at the cabin around 6 a.m. just as the sun was rising over the snow-covered landscape. The police were already there, surrounding the small log structure. Through the windows, I could see movement inside. Detective Williams was furious when she saw me. "I told you to stay in Portland." "And I told you that's my father in there." Through a listening device the police had managed to plant near the cabin's window, we could hear voices inside. Victoria was talking, and she sounded different, colder, more calculated than I'd ever heard her. "Robert, darling, you need to take your medication. The altitude up here is affecting your heart." "I feel fine, Victoria. Maybe we should head back to the resort." No. We're going to watch the sunrise from the cliff. It's why we came up here, remember? For our romantic Christmas morning." The cliff. Victoria was planning to push Dad off the cliff and make it look like he'd fallen while they were watching the sunrise. It was actually a clever plan. Romantic, tragic, and completely believable. "Robert, you seem confused again. Here, let me help you with your pills." Through the window, I could see Victoria approaching Dad with a glass of water and what looked like multiple pills. But these weren't the harmless vitamins we'd been substituting. She'd brought the real drugs, probably in a fatal dose. "Robert, you seem confused again. Here, let me help you with your pills." Through the window, I could see Victoria approaching Dad with a glass of water and what looked like multiple pills. But these weren't the harmless vitamins we'd been substituting. She'd brought the real drugs, probably in a fatal dose. That's when I noticed something that made my heart stop. Marcus Reed's silver BMW was parked behind the cabin, hidden from the main road. He was here too, which meant Victoria had backup for whatever she was planning. "Detective, Marcus is here. This is about to get much more dangerous." Detective Williams immediately radioed for additional units and ordered her team to prepare for entry. But before they could move, we heard Dad's voice through the listening device, and he sounded strange, slurred and confused. "Victoria, I don't feel well. What did you give me?" "Just your usual medication, darling. Come on, let's go see that sunrise." Through the window, I watched in horror as Victoria helped Dad toward the back door of the cabin. He was stumbling, clearly affected by whatever she'd given him. In a few minutes, they'd be at the cliff, and Dad would be too drugged to resist. "We have to move now," I whispered urgently to Detective Williams. "Wait for backup. We don't know where Marcus is or what weapons they might have. But I couldn't wait. Dad was running out of time, and every second we delayed increased the chances that Victoria would succeed. I made a decision that probably saved my father's life and almost got me killed. I broke from the police perimeter and ran toward the cabin's front door, shouting at the top of my lungs, "Victoria, I know what you did to David Chen. I know about the insurance money. I know everything." The effect was immediate. Through the window, I saw Victoria freeze, her face contorting with rage and panic. Dad, even in his drugged state, seemed to understand that something was wrong. "You!" Victoria snarled as she appeared in the cabin's doorway. "You ruined everything." Behind her, Marcus Reed emerged with a gun drawn. This was definitely not part of the police plan. "Step back, Isabella," Marcus called out. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "You see, I've been recording everything. Every conversation, every meeting, every plan you two have made. The police have copies of everything." It was a bluff, but it worked. Victoria's face went pale. "That's impossible. We were careful." Careful enough to avoid the cameras Mrs. Henderson installed in her yard? Careful enough to avoid the GPS tracker in your car? Careful enough to avoid the listening devices the police planted in Dad's house 3 weeks ago? I was buying time, hoping the police would find an opening to intervene. Dad was leaning against the doorframe, fighting to stay conscious, but I could see him trying to process what was happening. "Victoria," Dad slurred. "What is Isabella talking about? What insurance money?" Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. "Shut up, Robert. You've been nothing but a meal ticket from the beginning. Did you really think I loved you? You're old, boring, and worth more dead than alive?" The words hit Dad like physical blows, but they also seemed to cut through the drug haze. I saw recognition dawn in his eyes, not just of what Victoria had done, but of how completely he'd been fooled. That's when Marcus made his mistake. Distracted by the emotional drama playing out, he lowered his gun slightly. Detective Williams, who had been positioning herself for a clean shot, took her opportunity. "Police! Drop your weapon!" What happened next was chaos. Marcus spun toward Detective Williams, raising his gun. Dad, despite being drugged, threw himself at Victoria to prevent her from running. Victoria screamed and clawed at Dad's face, and I found myself diving behind a tree as gunshots rang out across the mountainside. When the noise stopped, Marcus was on the ground, wounded but alive. Victoria was in handcuffs, screaming threats at everyone in sight, and Dad was sitting in the snow, looking dazed but very much alive. As the EMTs checked Dad's vital signs and worked to counteract whatever Victoria had given him, I realized we'd won. Barely, and not without risk, but we'd actually stopped her. But the real victory would come later, when I finally got my mother's wedding ring back and learned the full extent of Victoria's criminal history. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Portland, watching the rain streak down the windows and reflecting on how dramatically our lives have changed. Victoria is serving 25 years to life for attempted murder, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. The investigation revealed she'd killed 2 previous husbands using similar methods, making Dad her 3rd intended victim. Marcus Reed received 15 years for conspiracy and attempted murder. His private investigation business was a front for helping Victoria research and plan her crimes. They'd been partners in more than just romance. Dr. Margaret Chen, the woman who bought my mother's ring, turned out to be David Chen's sister. When she learned the ring had been stolen from a murder victim's daughter, she immediately returned it to me, refusing any compensation. "Some things are more valuable than money," she said, and I've never forgotten those words. Dad made a full recovery, though the betrayal left emotional scars that will take time to heal. He's been seeing a therapist and has started dating a lovely woman named Grace, who works at the local library. She's kind, genuine, and nothing like Victoria. As for me, I learned that sometimes the people closest to us can be the most dangerous. But I also learned that family, real family, will fight for each other no matter what. Mrs. Henderson has become like a grandmother to me, and Jenny and Rachel have proven that friends can be just as valuable as blood relatives. I wear my mother's ring every day now, not just as a reminder of her, but as a symbol of the strength it took to protect the people I love. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's making sure the truth comes to light and justice is served. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family, betrayal, and the lengths we'll go to protect the people we love.